A decade after settling on the African Pepper Coast, his American grandfather stumbled into a tribal town, encountering a few restrained tribesmen. Convicted of witchcraft, the bound tribesmen were to be subject to a poisonous concoction to deem their innocence. Doubting the superstitious trial, Elder Tubman kicked the bowl of poisonous bark. The bitter sandalwood brew splashed on the earth. First, a baffled silence. Then the townsfolk beat him to death. An early lesson of cultural disharmony. Imposing foreign forms meant surefire demise. In the coastal town of Harper, William Tubman grew up in the capital of the former country of Maryland. His grandparents had sailed across the Atlantic aboard the Baltimore, alongside emancipated slaves seeking a new home of freedom. They were American Liberians, a small minority starkly distinct from their new tribal neighbors. Alexander survived his father. A tough, patriarchal man, order and discipline was cardinal. His son William was disciplined by both Bible and belt. Alexander's 5 children slept on the floor, fearing comfort degraded their characters. Fortunately, William was brilliant, excelling in school with his impressive memory. While studying, still just a boy, William enlisted in a local militia. Triumphant skirmishes against colonial defiant tribes crowned him a hero before he was old enough to vote. Retiring his rifle, Tubman embraced law, studying rigorously. Eventually passing the bar, he eyed the presidential palace. Unmatched ambition made him the youngest senator to ever take office. Fighting for the constitutional rights of indigenous Liberians, he had formerly fought in the bush. Liberia's economy was in a precarious position. It had courted investment from Germany, but the Great War severed this opportunity, crumbling the economy. Liberia fell into the hands of an American tire company. In exchange for conceding 1 million acres of rubberlands, Firestone promised finances, scarce amidst the Great Depression. Hotly debated in the legislature, Senator Tubman voted in favor of Firestone. Despite selling out, the deal failed to fix the economy. Rubber was no longer in demand, just like Liberia's sovereignty. The commercial class, desperate to avoid bankruptcy, organized a slave trade. Plantations resorted to hinterland folk, shackling natives into the same evil practice the American Liberians once escaped. It stood in stark contradiction to Liberia's motto,
"The love of liberty brought us here."
Breakneck growth and enslavement caught the world's attention. European powers encircled Liberia, seeking its subjugation. Africa's only republic was infamous, vulnerable, and broke. With the advent of another world war, German investments ruptured once again. Luckily, Liberia now proved pivotal to Allied tire production, staving off its takeover. Tubman's charisma ascended him to presidency, defeating a rubber magnate in the election. Economic instability, social disharmony, and a pressing need for modernization beset the country. Cigar-puffing Tubman instituted a bold vision to bind the isolated tribal majority and coastal American Liberians into a coherent nation, with development as its thread. The Liberian Constitution resembled the United States, however, presidential interest prevailed. In order to avoid a tribal majority takeover by nationalism, Tubman bent the state to his will. Centralizing, the country fell under his strict leadership. Bureaucracy was handpicked, with loyal and even illiterate servants, ensuring loyalty to a fault. The bureaucracy was nepotistic, Parliament a reliable rubber stamp. Lip service was paid to democracy, as elections garnered legitimacy, but Tubman saw inclusive autocracy as the avenue for his vision. Tubman moved with haste, dropping the sterling for the American dollar. The economic open doors swung wide open. Leases on land were granted for mining, agriculture, and timber industries. Foreign investment poured in. Investors started banks, restaurants, and service industries. German nationals began palm oil, banana, coffee, and inroad construction ventures. Spanish hotels, movie theaters, and sawmills sprung up. American and Swedish iron mining brought half of foreign investment. After Japan, Liberia was soon the fastest growing economy on the planet. Liberians received equity capital in these projects, dividends for concessions. In some cases, citizen and corporate interests conveniently convened with employment, access to medical and dental care, education, and housing. Electricity, clean water, sewage systems, research institutes, hospitals, and medical schools came to Liberian shores. Highways connected Liberia to their neighbors, telegraphy linked it with the world. With the country in swing, Tubman sought what his predecessors were incapable of achieving: unity between American Liberians and the indigenous peoples. Before office, the former were treated and traded like livestock. Enslaved natives transported government officials and soldiers around by hammock. Instead, Tubman journeyed to the jungled hinterland by jeep and foot, attending palavers and banquets with local chiefs, intending to halt intertribal warfare. Many chiefs reciprocated by visiting the capital Monrovia, despite not speaking English, to have a voice in the National Unification Council. Despite forming the combined majority, the indigenous Capele, Bassa, Gribo, Gyo, Mano, Kru, and others lacked police, justice, health, and education services. Emblematic of their cold relations, only a single road joined Monrovia to the hinterlands. Tubman's integration and unification program aimed at erasing American and indigenous Liberian divisions. The term American Liberian was banned. All Liberians were to be equal under law. But this conciliatory policy frightened conservative American Liberians, fearful of native takeover. American Liberians only ever compose 1 in 20 Liberians. Antebellum Southern architecture, dress, behavior, and language segregated them starkly. A superiority complex inherited from the American South was paralleled in Liberia through class differences. Many consider the indigenous uncivilized. Tubman knew his grandfather's story well, but pressed on.
Hello, citizens.
During a public address, shots rang out. In panic, the crowd fled chaotically. The assassination attempt faltered. Tubman's disruptive ideals now threatened his life. Tubman began a romantic relationship with Amy Ashwood, a Pan-Africanist, former wife of Marcus Garvey. Women gained suffrage alongside all tribal peoples. In solidarity, Tubman occasionally wore traditional African attire, as well as employing anthropologists to preserve traditional indigenous art forms. Massive campaigns were deployed to combat illiteracy. Only 1% were English literate before Tubman. Stories taught tribal populations about agriculture, disease, and sound sanitary practices. Before, 1 in 50 Liberians could read. Now, 1 in 5 could, with nearly half the young generation literate. Educated indigenous earned positions in law firms and government. Caravan and peripatetic travel were replaced by taxicab and bus services. Modern highways, concrete bridges, railroads, and local airlines inextricably linked the hinterland to the capital. The country of once only 6 doctors and 2 dentists grew to receive dozens of clinics and several hospitals accompanied by clean water supply. Before a backwater shanty town of 4 paved streets and corrugated metal mansions, Monrovia was devoid of street lighting, telephones, and sewage systems. Named after American founding father James Monroe, the town grew tenfold into a city, receiving modern amenities and services. A dilapidated sports pitch became a stadium. Yet its southern antebellum, Greek Revival, Georgian, and neoclassical architectural style was a world divorced from the hinterlands. Regardless, all roads led to President Tubman's 8-story dream mansion with an atomic bomb shelter, underground swimming pool, private chapel, and cinema. After reigning over a quarter of a century, William Tubman became ill and passed away. Through his enormous estate, his wife became one of the richest women in the world. Elected as unifier of Liberia, he offered an olive branch to its diverse majority. It was his inability, however, in ensuring economic gains to the newly recognized underclass that bedeviled Liberia. A strong civic unity never incarnated, so the dual society prevailed. Despite obsessive involvement with nearly every transaction of the state, Tubman saw unobtrusive free enterprise as poverty's prescription. Solutions pertained to widening the economic doors, but communists rigidly excluded. This policy brought Western amenities never afforded previously. Cognizant of historical over-reliance on rubber, alternative industries of coffee, palm oil, sugarcane, and rice were cultivated. Although Tubman sought to diversify away from Washington through the open door policy, it only fused them closer. The Western Alliance stalwart left Liberia as Africa's main iron ore exporter, possessor of the world's largest rubber plantation, latex factory, and the second largest mercantile fleet. If Liberia's patriarch was Tubman, then foreign entities were its matriarch. Over-reliance on the teat of foreign capital stunted the growth of an entrepreneurial class. Foreign firms accounted for half the economy and most government income. Growth manifested rather than development, in other words, money, not wealth. Where development and education occurred was limited to the coast, with lion's share to Monrovia. The apotheosized Tubman pioneered patriotism through his personal rule. Uncle Shad had sat on his back porch calling out passerbys to chat. Delirious crowds held flower archers and hurled confetti as he toured the streets in his Cadillac convertible. He played drums and quadrille dance at public functions. He was, however, the great tree under which healthy opposition wilted. Graft and corruption became commonplace. The true Whig Party permitted no opposition or free press. The exercise of his enormous emergency powers fostered a political atmosphere of weaklings. Foreigners and tribal chiefs were played against one another to ensure his continued authority. Tubman's successor perpetuated the status quo. Conditions for most natives remained poor. The corrupt, autocratic institutions and deteriorating indigenous relations stoked animosity. But now, the once hazardous journey to the capital had been shrunk to a short drive. A decade after Tubman, American Liberian fears materialized when natives finally toppled the colonial regime. A series of gruesome civil wars ensued, leaving Liberia lost in anarchic poverty and 250,000 perished. Everything Tubman progressively built in Little America was buried under its own ashes.
I know that I'll be contented with yesterday's memories.